and sit down.
Yes, sir, we promised you a great man.
Now I want a nice, clean game. From all of you.
That's great.
Come call us the R word.
David has moments of integrity.
But this has been awesome, and we should do this again.
You're funny.
Are you not entertained?
ETF murdering people.
Is this not why you are here?
With the plan to exterminate the Jews of Europe.
A radical libertarian.
Things on homosexuality and stuff, or just the petty little things that
I'm gonna hop in here real quick.
Like, fucking yes, obviously I did that. And
Welcome to Fite.
This is FSM.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Fight Club. This is one of the most anticipated things I've ever had the pleasure of putting together with two returning warriors to the ring. I'm sure you saw both of them in that intro, debating one of the most hot button issues in the world today. But before we get into all of that, I want to say thank you to our hosts, Civil. I'm really excited to be doing this exclusively on there. And Civil is a privately funded 501c3 nonprofit committed to promoting civility and building community that challenges coercive power structures. And Civil is free from fear-mongering, censorship, and ads, made free by their generous donors at the Foundation for Harmony and Prosperity. I know you can be watching this without an actual account, but we definitely encourage you guys to go sign up for a free account. It's a great site. They have some awesome content on there already with more stuff to come. And we got to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsors as always. Blood of Tyrants Wine, the official spirit of 1776, now with a brand new energy tea called Liquid Freedom. They will have you refreshed and energized to go out and fight for liberty all day long. Or if you're looking for a nice night in while sipping on the blood and tears of your enemies and supporting the destruction of the tyrannical state, look no further than Blood of Tyrants Wine. Choose between a Merlot, Pinot Grigio, or both, distributed by activists you know and love. Bloodoftyrants.wine is the place to go. Use promo code FSM to get 10% off your first order. Again, that's bloodoftyrants.wine, or click the link in the description and use promo code FSM. And our newest sponsor here at Free Speech Media, My Arcade. Save your digital legacy for generations. Don't just save your pictures where they are at risk of being censored, deleted, or lost. My Arcade gives you security and privacy at a great price while telling the whole story in your own voice and writing. Unlike a cloud backup to just dump all of your random pictures, My Arcade has you upload one full memory at a time. A picture or short video post with text and or audio captions create a timeline that makes going back through your memories an easy and pleasant experience for you and your loved one. Sign up for a 30-day free trial today and see what all the craze is about. No payment info necessary. This is a true free trial. Go to myarkit.com. Use promo code FSM to support the channel. That's MYARKIT.com, promo code FSM. You can sign up for a personal account to save your life forever, or if you have an important event coming up, you can create an event account. This will let attendees add photos and videos for you and other admins to go through later, and curate a beautiful digital album for your upcoming wedding, convention, graduation, or shower. Again, go to myarkit.com to learn more. Promo code FSM. Without further ado, the moment you guys have all been waiting for, let's bring up our fighters. If I can make this work right. There we go. All right, we're working with a newer system that I am not used to. So bear with me. Introducing first, from Los Angeles, California, known for his roles as Jacob, Deputy Standall, Virgil Poe, and Lucifer, host of The Reality Check, the one and only Mark Pellegrino. And his opponent hailing from the great city of New York, as seen all over the podcast circuit, including Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and the one and only Joe Rogan, a host of Part of the Problem and co-host of Legion of Skanks, the Libertarian Tupac, the one and only Dave Smith. Guys, welcome to Fight Club.
Thanks for having me, David.
Having me.
Guys, it is an absolute pleasure to get to put this together and have you guys on. Before we kick this off, I'm going to do that like referee thing in the middle of the ring and say I want to keep this as civil as possible. We are on a site called that, right? So I have a lot of respect for both of you. I'd hope that you guys can both walk away with a little bit more respect for each other than you came in. I know that's a tall ask, so what I'm really going to ask for is that you try to make it to where me and the audience don't leave here with less respect than we came, and keep it on the up and up.
Hey,
That being
speaking of respect, I just wanted to give a shout out to my teacher, Jean-Jacques Machado, who's being inducted right now into the ADCC Hall of Fame in Las Vegas. I'm representing him with my shirt. I would be there, of course, but I decided to defend the only free state in the Middle East instead. But I wanted to give a shout out to him. He's done a lot for my life. I don't think he's going to watch this. I don't think this is his primary interest. But if he should, I wanted him to know I'm thinking about him as well. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, David.
No, very cool.
Oh yeah. So I wanna go right into kind of opening statements, but I want you guys to include some piece of why the audience should listen to you on this topic. I know neither of you are like on the ground reporters or from there or anything like that. So fairly even playing field, but definitely a little bit removed. And so kind of give a little bit of your background on the issue and why you guys feel called to defend it so much. Let's start off with Mark.
Well, my background on the issue is I started defending Israel in 2014 on social media when A-list Hollywooders took out a petition against Israel when they retaliated against 3 young Israelis being kidnapped and murdered by the Palestinians. I found at the time, 2014 sort of marked a turning point, I think, in social media, because that's when I started to notice ideas turning toxic. Before that time, you could have amazing discussions with people on social media. Post 2014, whatever happened, whether it was a graduating class of activists that came out of multiple colleges at the same time, it became impossible to have civil discourse with people about things with which you disagreed. So I came out in 2014 for Israel, explained my reasons why ad nauseum, of course, and in 2016 was invited to Israel as a part of their program called American Voices in Israel. I went with a number of a couple of other actors, a couple of producers, a couple of agents, and we toured the entire country for 9 days. I have to say that the diversity opinion with respect to the Palestinian issue over in Israel was extensive. The 5 or 6 people who are our monitors probably had 5 or 6 different opinions about the Palestinian issue, many of them quite sensitive, far more sensitive than I am to the problem. They live there. I understand their perceptions and their feelings about it. Of course, I have my own. But my primary reason for being here has to do with not just defending the only free state in the Middle East, but also a critique about the liberty movement, which I'll get to when we get into our opening statements.
All right. Dave, go for it.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I don't exactly know what the reason why people should listen to me on this subject is. I'd hope it's because I make a compelling argument about it. As far as my background with the subject, I mean, I'm Jewish and I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I was kind of my entire life. Let's just say I certainly heard the Israeli side of the story. Then that was pretty much what was kind of, I wouldn't say drilled into me, but was my entire world. That was all I had ever heard about it. And I thought, I bought it completely. And when I became a Ron Paulian libertarian, which started in 2007, 2008, I got very interested in reading a lot about the history of this issue. It was, you could only really oppose the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan and kind of the whole terror wars before kind of bumping up against the fact that, Israel was a partner in this. And I just kind of obsessively read a lot about it. And I basically was convinced that, the one side of the story that I had grown up with was, let's say, at best, incomplete, and at worst, just downright propaganda. And as far as this debate goes, one of the reasons why I was particularly interested to take it was kind of the same thing that I think Mark touched on at the end there, that there's issues in the liberty movement. And I'm sure, we have these kind of these different camps within the broader sphere of the liberty movement, that at least on this issue, there are some people who seem to be like kind of diametrically opposed. Certainly the objectivists, for the most part, at least from what I've seen, seem to be very adamant being pro-Israel. And from my perspective, it requires a complete abandonment of all objectivist principles. And so I find that very interesting, and I would love to kind of get into that more, because I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to debate an objectivist on Israel-Palestine before.
Fair enough. You want to just kind of roll that into your kind of opening statements too?
Sure, happy to. Well, okay, so first of all, I will just say that and I there's several objectivists who I don't much like, but I do have tremendous respect for Ayn Rand. I revere her. I think she was a genius, and she's not perfect, and just like none of us are, but I think she was a brilliant, brilliant woman. And one of the things that's interesting to me, okay, so this is, I'm sorry if this part is just a little bit inside baseball, but I promise it'll just be the short part at the beginning. But David, as you know, and I'm sure Mark, as you know, there are within the liberty movement kind of these arguments. And so one of the points that objectivists would always, every single objectivist thinker I've ever heard talk about the subject, would throw at Rothbardian ANCAP types, is that you can't have an anarchist society because the defense protection agencies are just going to devolve into gangs, and then the stronger gangs can dominate the weaker ones, and those people's natural rights will be not protected. And yet, in reality, when we have these nation states who clearly by objectivist standards are devolved into nothing more than gangs, when they fight their wars, you find objectivists defending the bigger, more powerful gangs and totally abandoning the basic objectivist principles of natural rights for all of the people who live under the subjugation of the rival gang. It's like the worst case scenario about what you worry that anarchy could be playing out right in front of us, and some of you guys seem to be cheering it on. I mean, think about it like this, right? The most basic objectivist principles are essentially that objective reality exists, and that man determines or understands that objective reality through his rational thought. And if that's true, and as Ayn Rand says, you can deduce from that man has rights by his very nature, then all I would just say is I think all of us would agree, if we were talking about some type of criminal activity within the United States of America, we would all agree that this person has the presumption of innocence, deserves a fair trial, and that also you can't just go around killing a lot of people that are around that person, even if they were guilty after a fair trial. Yet somehow, when it comes to war, when it comes to these issues, objectivists seem to have a micro sense of morality and a macro sense of morality. Things that would not be morally acceptable to do within a nation state are now totally acceptable to do to another group of people. They become collectivists on this issue. And the problem with an objectivist having a micro morality and a macro morality is that destroys objectivism. That's the whole central claim of the thing, is that this is all deduced from nature, and man's rights are deduced from nature. One of my favorite things about objectivists, they're very much in this sense on the same page as Rothbardians, is that objectivists don't just object to the government because it's inefficient. They object to it because it's an appalling outrage that steals the very life and liberty of individuals. If you talk to, by the way, if you've ever, you might know this better than me, Mark, but there are those letters that Ayn Rand wrote to, it wasn't Milton Friedman, but it was Leonard Reed, I think. And she's just furious because he's like arguing with people about rent control or something, and he's going like, this is inefficient, and she's like, rent control means homeless, it means people's lives destroyed, and like and I think she's totally right about that. And objectivists can get this moral outrage about rent control or the agricultural department, but when it comes to the Department of blowing up babies, we don't see any of this outrage. And it's so clearly the worst things that government does. And also, they lie through their teeth to us. We catch them constantly lying to us. And you would just think that any objectivist could like say, look at Israel. I'll wrap up on this, but any objectivist could look at Israel and say, well, first of all, You're describing it as the only free country in the region. The government owns 93% of the land, and they have conscription. I mean, I don't care. A Randian should look at this and say these are the criminals in every Ayn Rand book that's ever been written. The parasites off the American taxpayer. Why don't I hear objectivists outraged about involuntary taxation to put a foreign nation on welfare? But I don't seem to get any of that. It seems to me, and I'm interested to hear what you think, but it seems to me to be a total contradiction of all of the stated first principles.
All
Well,
right, Mark.
It's certainly a handful of stuff to have to answer, and I'll attempt to answer as much of that as I can. If I forget any particulars, please let me know. There's a reason I call Israel the freest country in the Middle East, because it is, irrespective of the government owning a great deal of land and irrespective of conscription, which, by the way, does not extend to the 2 million Arabs that are Israelis there, and is voluntary for the Druze that live there. Despite some of those, what I would consider moral imperfections, they had a commitment from the Balfour Declaration on. The Balfour Declaration expressed the desire on the part of the real colonizers, the English, to make a home for the Jewish people, provided they respected the rights of religious and ethnic minorities. This same principle was enshrined in their Declaration of Independence by the Zionist founders themselves. And however imperfectly they have tried to implement these concepts of equality, equal rights before the law, a pluralistic society, and they have tried to make those concepts a concrete realities, which is something that cannot be said for the rest of the Arab world. The result of that has been a thriving Israeli Arab community that has the highest standard of living of any Arab country in the world, and I would say of any country in the world next to the United States of America, and that's not a mistake. Look, when I'm judging the rightness or wrongness of particularly October 7th or the state of Israel, of course, I have to do it with a kind of contextuality. I have to apply a context to it, a context relative to the rest of the states around it, a context relative to the way people understand freedom today. But I do evaluate it from an objectivist perspective, which is a rational egoist's perspective. I evaluate the righteousness of Israel according to that rational egoist's perspective. And that means that as a rational egoist, I value my life and my values as primaries, as I think Dave does, Dave Smith does, I think you do as well, Dave Fite. I think any human being who's rational values himself, his life, and his values, which is an entire universe of values, as primaries. And if my life and my values are threatened, then it is right for me to defend them as vigorously as possible. And that means vigorously means until the threat is ended. I extend that same ethics to the state itself, a rights-respecting state, which I consider Israel to be despite its imperfections. Now, no other state in that region, in my view, has a legitimate claim to self-defense, as a rights-respecting state does, just like a person who does not claim rights as a criminal breaking into my house loses. He forfeits his life, his right to his life, his capacity to negotiate, rule of law, all suspended for the time that he is breaking into my house, and he leaves on my terms, not his terms. Well, the same thing follows for countries as well, and Israel's right to self-defense is the same as my individual one, to defend itself vigorously until the threat is over. Now, that means a particular thing with respect to the Palestinian people, and I do say the Palestinian people, not just Hamas. I say the Palestinian people, that Israel might have to do what we had to do in Nazi Germany, what we had to do in imperialist Japan, what the North had to do to the slave-holding southern states, which was more than demilitarize them, which was more than disarm them, which was more than defeat their armies. It was demoralize them, because they were infected by a toxic ideology. The entire culture. You can't tell me that the slaveholding South was not toxic and did not eventually come up with entire philosophies that were meant to debase African blacks so that they could justify their continued abuse of them. You cannot tell me that the German Nazi culture was not sickened by toxic Nazism, and that ideology and the ideology of imperialist Japan, which enabled them to go to China and rape the Philippines, that toxic ideology has to be demoralized. And what that means is the people who hold that ideology need to know in no uncertain terms that ideology will not lead to success, happiness, or 72 virgins, but to absolute death, horror, and destruction, which is what war is. One of the things that disturbs me most online is I see this attempt to sanitize war. Let's add rules and laws to war. And how horrible can you be not to acknowledge rules and laws and war, civility and war. War is precisely the absence of civilization. And the person who initiates war has said, to hell with laws, to hell with rights, to hell with civilization. I'm going to get what I want by violence. So those people who have initiated that force, in this case, the Palestinians, who have been doing it for decades, not just on October 7th, as everybody says, the battle didn't start on October 7th. No, but that was a conclusion of ceasefire after ceasefire after ceasefire after ceasefire, appeasement of appeasement after appeasement after appeasement, and altruistic ethics in writ large, not rationally self-interested ethics. So they have to be completely and totally defeated. They have to know that they cannot appeal to rights. They cannot appeal to civility. They cannot appeal to the better angels of our nature until they surrender. This is why I take issue with the title of the show. It shouldn't be ceasefire or eradication. It should be ceasefire or surrender. By surrendering, the Palestinian people embrace civility and law, rule of law again, and objective ethics, and they can move on into civilization with the rest of us.
Fair enough. I honestly, so obviously I'm a little bit on the middle on this issue. Otherwise, I wouldn't be hosting a debate on it. And you guys are both making some good points thus far. I guess Dave, I'll let you respond to some of what he just said, and then
there was also
go
Dave initially that I have to respond to with respect to.
Sure. No, well, I took that more as your opening and not really a response to what I said. But I'd be curious to hear your response. Just to respond to some of what you're saying here. So first of all, to say, like, if we cite the Balfour Declaration, I guess the problem that I see with that, again, it's like I've done so many of these debates, and so many people who I debate against are either leftists or right wingers or something like that, and so they don't share these kind of principles, and then I can kind of argue, like, they have the principle of, like, the state is kind of necessary and good, and so it's a little bit different. Whereas when I hear someone like you say it, it's like, so we're appealing to the Balfour Declaration now for property rights. I mean, the people living in the land had homesteaded the property rights. If you have any type of, like, Lockean view of how one comes to have property rights, you can't just say, like, oh, well, the British were desperate because they were in war, so they wrote a letter to a banker to ask for money for their war effort and said, in turn, we'll support this Zionist cause that you like, and therefore, like, I don't know, therefore this is the start of, like, Israel being the good guys. I think there's just, it's you're almost giving it's a caricature version of the history, which is what a lot of the defenders of Israel rely on. We're to believe that Israel is nothing but a rights-defending state. I just don't. It's so wild to hear an objectivist talk about.
I put it in the context of comparative to the rest of the region, just like I have to put in the United States as a rights-respecting I have to talk about the principles of the United States as opposed to what they actually do in practice. It all look.
Well, but that's a cop out from real life. I mean, okay, so like, no, but the crazy thing about this is, right, is that so you have like objectivists. Okay, you're not anarchist, fair enough. You believe in a night watchman state. If the government is just protecting their people's rights with a voluntary tax, as Ayn Rand would say, right, then it's okay. But okay, we're talking about governments that are way beyond the pale of that. By any reasonable objectivist, well, let me just finish my. By any reasonable objectivist point of view, these are criminal organizations. Now, fine, you can say that other criminal organizations are more primitive or barbaric or something like that, but still to come to the defense, and then you're going to say it's only in comparison. But for the sake of argument, we will now treat them as a rights defending state so they can act in self-defense, but these other more primitive gangs are not allowed to act in self-defense. Of course, that's a necessary component here in order to just see the pro-Israel side of all of this history. But of course, all of this is ridiculous. And as I pointed out at the beginning, you would never apply this standard of self-defense to yourself. You say you derive it and you hold the same position for yourself as for the nation of Israel and America, not for Palestinians or Muslim countries, evidently. But that's not true. You would not argue that if somebody came and from a neighboring neighborhood, if some people came into a neighboring neighborhood and killed a few people and then ran back into their neighborhood, you would not advocate that the local police department has the right to just level the place now. And anyone there who supported, oh, you know what? I say the neighborhood that's infested with the Bloods and the Crips in Chicago, I say they have a toxic worldview, and they need to be, whatever you said, they need to be punished and humiliated, and they need to have this beaten out of them. And therefore now the government has the right to just kill a whole bunch of innocent civilians. And just to your final point here, this sounds good and tough to just say, like, what's up with these laws on war? It's war. And one side is pure evil and the other side's pure good, so we can do whatever we want. But would you really agree that there ought to be no moral laws in war, that once a war has started, you can just go around, like, I'm not saying Israel is doing this, but is there any limiting principle here? Could you just go around and start collecting babies and killing them? Is that now morally acceptable because these rules in war are just for pussies?
No, no, the morals were dropped when war started. So you're dropping morals when you start a war with somebody else.
So in response, then you should be allowed to just round up babies and kill them.
I'm not saying that. You're saying that. I'm saying.
I'm asking that. I'm not saying that.
What I'm saying is that you abandon morals and law when you go to war with another person. So what happens when the
not immoral?
So when the defenders are attempting to defend themselves and you surround yourself with babies while shooting at the defenders, and babies are killed in the act of the defenders defending themselves, that is the the responsibility of the initiator of force. So the moral culpability for all of the stuff that's happening in Gaza today, from the children that are being killed to the Israelis who are dying, is the moral culpability of not only Hamas, but the Palestinian people who refuse to surrender and embrace civilization once again. But hold on.
But this is very clear.
Balfour Declaration was simply a letter written to a banker. It was also accepted by the international community, by the League of Nations. That territory...
Yeah, they also have no right, yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter. It did at the time. It gave it legality. It gave it legality in the eyes of the world. In the eyes of the...
Who cares?
That place was a largely uninhabited place with Jews and Arabs both. Many different types of nationalities lived there, but it came under the protection of a certain power that then had a legitimate claim to decide what to do with it, which it then turned over to the United Nations.
So I guess communism was the legitimate law through much of the world. So I guess communism is legitimate now.
I'm not saying that. That's not what...
I know you're not, but that's the logical implication of this argument that you're making. Look, again, let me just make this point so we can drill down on this, because of course Mark had to switch the scenario around. So look, obviously, if somebody who's holding two babies and is shooting at you and you shoot back to take them out and the babies die, sure, that's the responsibility of the person shooting. However, hold on. However, if someone comes and shoots at me, and then I, through an AI program, track them back to their home where their babies are, and I bomb the place. That is a different scenario than somebody is actively shooting at me. And that describes much more of what's been going on in the war in Gaza than the scenario you're using.
What do you suggest they do? Sacrifice their own people to go in there and try to save the Palestinians' lives because you believe the Palestinians' lives are equal to those of the Israelis? Do you believe that?
Well, I'm sorry, ask the question again.
Do you believe the Palestinians' life, or let's say the criminal who breaks into my house to murder me, has an equal claim to life as I do?
The criminal? No.
Do you think the Palestinians who engage in this warfare, who are not surrendering, or nor are they rebelling against Hamas, who seem to be willing to bear the price of their own children being killed? In fact, many of them get stipends for it, and they get social cred for it. Do you think in some you don't think in some way they are responsible for what they're doing?
Because I'm not a
my life for those people. Okay, are they on a lesser moral scale than I am?
No, well, I'm not a collectivist. I'm an individualist. So, no, I think the person breaking into your house clearly has lost some degree of a claim on his life. If you feel, I think you should be allowed to kill someone who breaks into your house. Hold on, Mark, you gotta. Well, Mark, if you're gonna ask me a question, let's try not to talk over me every time I talk. I'll listen to you when. Huh?
When I listen to you, you give me 50 things. It's a shotgun type of logic. So I have to respond to one thing at a time. So that
sure. So, but you just asked me a question, and I'm trying to answer it.
If there's no other way to take him out.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm just not following. I was trying to answer. If there's not any way to take who out?
No other way to take that person out because he hides within his family. Can you bomb that person and the collateral damage being his family, who are also harboring him? Maybe the children are innocent because they don't know what's going on.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
So if someone broke into my house and then goes back to their house, can I kill their whole family? Is that the question?
Police actions and war are not the same thing. You've made this comparison before in the past.
But I'm asking you why not? Like, why do we get to this max?
Because we live in a civil society. Because we live in a civil society where we delegate force, except in emergencies, to the state. In a police action, I just delegate that action to a state. In a war, I cannot.
Not only did you ask me a question and interrupt before I could ask that, but then you interrupted on the question I was asking you and didn't even hear what I was trying to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if you're saying that there is this different force of morality, like I said before, on the macro to the micro level, that the way nation states deal with each other is not the same as the way you deal with each other with law enforcement within a nation, how exactly does,
in fact, I said the opposite. I said the nation state that recognizes rights has the same moral obligations as the individual who recognizes rights.
Exactly, but now
I made a distinction between recognizing rights and not recognizing rights.
Okay, fine. So then back to that, because actually when I said rights recognizing nations, you interrupted me then to point out that that's not really what you said. And now you just interrupted me to point out that that is in fact what you said. Okay, again, the U.S. government spends $6 trillion a year, has started 7 wars in the last years and killed hundreds of thousands of people. It is, by any objectivist Randian lens, one of the worst criminal organizations on the face of the planet. Yet for the purposes of this debate, you refer to it simply as a rights-protecting organization that is now supposed to have kind of extra rights within an internation conflict. Do you not see the contradiction there?
I don't think it's extra rights. I don't think the other countries have a claim to rights. I think the country that has the principle of rights, attempts to enact the principle of rights, even though they're doing it imperfectly, is the one that can make the claim.
Mark, I don't think you're hearing what I'm asking you. I don't think you're hearing what I'm asking you. You're just going right.
No, you're making claims that I don't make. You're making.
Okay, Mike.
When I try to qualify rights respecting by the actual conditions that are out there, which is there is no entirely free state in the world. There are semi-free states. The United States came closest to it for a time with many social and political contradictions in its origins. All right. But they are still now we can only be considered a semi-free state. But in its founding principles, we have the stuff of being able to be free. We have the ideals that I think human beings should embody, that enable us to claim a rights status that another nation, like say Saudi Arabia, cannot.
Okay, so this rights status that we get to claim, even though we're not a rights defending state, we're actually a criminal organization. That's very, very far from that.
I disagree. I mean, there's parts of me that sort of bend your way. I understand exactly what you're saying, but I disagree.
Disagree with what?
I disagree that we're a criminal organization. I think that our government is highly flawed, highly statist. 99% of what it does is wrong and shouldn't be done. But we have the moral principles in our founding documents that can lead us right back.
Okay, so if an individual were to do what the United States of America's federal government does, would you consider that individual criminal?
And what specific things?
I were to say, give me half your money or I'll throw you in jail. I were to dictate what substances you can put in your body or I'll throw you into a cage in my house. If I were to say that, would that make me a criminal?
All of that I disagree with, and of course that would make you an individual. As an individual,
right? So so again, micro morality and macro morality.
But you probably also wouldn't be functioning according to any morality at all, except the Dave Smith morality, which is I feed myself. So there's narcissistic essence to the morality.
Yeah, I'm not saying obviously I'd be a bad guy if I did it too. I'm just saying the point is that the point is that you do carve out this different morality for the state than you would for individuals.
I don't.
Listen, you just said, listen, Mark, come on. You just said the government's not criminal, but if I did the same thing, I would be criminal. So you are carving out a different moral standard. How does that jive with objectivism? The whole principle of it is that morals are rationally deduced from nature. So how exactly is it that you get to this other level where nature doesn't exist anymore? My point isn't even, by the way, I'm not even, just to be very clear here, I'm not saying in any society that the way you deal with another nation or the way you deal with police matters are ever going to be the same. I'm just pointing out, just because you claim to be an objectivist, that it is a clear contradiction of objectivist tenets.
No, I'm not holding the nation to a separate standard. I'm not holding states to a separate standard. I'm understanding the contextual nature of the argument that we're talking about, the contextual nature of morality, the contextual nature of the ethics that we find ourselves in, which is unfortunately not completely adopting an individualist ethics anywhere in the world. But if we were to name one country that did, despite the political class, it would be America.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just if you look at that from the perspective of how Americans treat their own citizens, you can make an argument that we have a higher degree of liberty here than a lot of places in the world. I will even accept the argument that I think if you look at the way Israelis treat their own citizens, they have a higher degree of freedom than much of that region, probably the best place to be if you're an Israeli citizen. But then there's also the pesky little issue of how the U.S. federal government has treated Iraqi citizens, people in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, in Somalia, and then there's also the pesky little issue of how Israel has treated the Palestinians who live in Gaza and the West Bank. And they have been under total either occupation or dominance since 1967. And I don't think you get to, when we're going to say, relatively speaking, we're rights defending organizations, therefore we have the right to violate the rights of whoever we want to, it seems, in foreign countries. I think, again, you're faced with a giant contradiction.
One thing that I love about Frederick Douglass is that I consider him a second founding father, and that he was able to hold the white man's feet to the fire, especially in his July 4th oration, and make the American population see its hypocrisy and attempt to align it, not divorce itself from the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, but align itself with those principles as ideals that they should aspire to. These are still ideals that exist in our founding documents that are ideals we should aspire to. Israel has the similar ideals in its Declaration of Independence, in the Balfour Declaration, in its fidelity to the Balfour Declaration, in its founding documents. No such document exists in the Arab world. In fact, if we're going to look at the Hamas charter, it is genocidal in nature. It is the opposite. So it has no principles to go to. So you keep putting me in the world of it's either perfect or it's fucked.
No, I'm not saying that at all, actually.
But we have the principles that can still be our North Star should we decide to actually use them to guide our behavior. Now, you talked about occupation. Occupation is even a complex complex issue to many Israelis. You know who it's not complex to? The Palestinian people. But it is complex for the Israelis. I'm sorry, I've been there. Have you?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, as you say that, do you not just kind of hear the words coming out of your mouth? It's like, yeah, even the Israelis feel awfully bad about what they're doing, but to the Palestinians, they all agree it shouldn't be done to them.
I'm saying it's complicated. I'm saying it's complicated because they're trying to marry, in some respects, contradictions, and some of the contradictions are within their own ethical code, which I'm sorry to say is mostly altruistic. Look, they were attacked by Arab armies in 48. They were attacked. Well, they preempted the attack in 67, but the attack was coming. It was coming. It was coming because the Sinai was being occupied by Egyptians and Iraqis, and so was Gaza. Okay, they were building up. They created a mutual defense pact with Syria, with Jordan. Nobody would help the Israelis. They appealed to the French. They appealed to the United States, to somebody to help them. They would not, and so they had to do it on their own. In that space of time to defend themselves during that 6-day war, they occupied territory that was used for 19 years to launch thousands of attacks on Israeli people that killed hundreds of Israelis. Now, you mean to tell me that they don't have a right to occupy territory that's being used as a corridor of war? I think they do. They finally gave up Gaza because it has no strategic significance to them and allowed Gaza autonomy, which what happened?
No, they did not.
Yes, they did. They allowed it autonomy. They allowed it governing autonomy, which gave them Hamas.
It's just, well, I mean, listen, okay, let's maybe get back into some issue, because you're just...
Don't give up the West Bank because they're willing to give up, hold on, they're willing to give up 94% of the West Bank. It's the Arabs who refuse to give up all but 6% of it, which is of strategic value to the life of Israel. It's their failure to negotiate, not the Israelis' failure to negotiate. Tell me that they didn't have a right to occupy land that was being used.
Hold on. Let me, if I could just speak now for a second, okay? Look, man, I don't know what to tell you. If anybody here is familiar with the history of this at all, this is cartoonishly one-sided, and even the one-sided. Listen, I let you talk for a minute. Let me get it, Mark. I literally sat here and listened to.
It's not sophisticated, bro. Don't act. You're being sophisticated. Don't act like my history is cartoonish and yours isn't.
Well, hold on. Listen. Okay, listen, buddy. If this is David, I mean, you're moderating.
I'm just going to chime in real. Yeah, I'm going to chime in here real quick to just say, at least on my end, and I'm assuming on the rest of the stream's end, when you guys battle for the mic, Dave wins 100% of the time. Mark's mic is kind of a little bit choppy. So when you're trying to cut in, I can't hear you very well. I think Dave can, but I really can't.
No, it's also like that.
One at a time.
It's also like that for me too. I'm stopping every time I can hear that he's trying to talk, and I just sat and listened to you for a few minutes. So let me just get a thought out, because it's like every 3 words I speak, you're cutting me off. And it's not. I don't know. It's not a good debate tactic, if nothing else.
But you do it as well. I mean, I sit and listen to you for 5 minutes, and you throw out 75 things that I have to answer.
Well, you just went through the entire history of Israel, so let me respond for a second. And look, when I say that this is all right, listen, I'm gonna just talk, and then
it's been a little bit back and forth on the.
I'm not saying
as far as who's cutting who off, but let's let Dave actually respond to the history real quick.
Let Dave speak after this. Don't call my history cartoonish. That's just ad hominem. It's simply ad hominem. You can have a disagreement with me respecting the history and the interpretation of the history, but don't go ad hominem. And I won't.
It's not an ad hominem. That's not what an ad hominem is. I'm describing the way you just described the history. That's not an ad hominem. And what the point that I was making was that, listen, even if you listen to read any of the historians who are on the pro-Israel side, go read all of Benny Morris's stuff. The issue itself is enormously more complex than that. And if I wouldn't sit here and just describe the issue as being like, these poor Arabs have just been put upon, they've done nothing wrong, they've never initiated initiated violence against the Israelis, and they've just been no, they embraced terrorism very early on. But the reality of the situation is that there was a movement from outside of the area of Palestine. It started in the late 1800s and really picked up steam in the 1900s, and that got international financing. As Mark pointed out before, yes, it's true that the League of Nations and the British Empire and the Rothschilds and like and even the early UN, yes, they kind of supported a new state being created in this region. It was not supported, however, by the people who were living there. Many wars did break out. There was guilt on a lot of different sides. But the fact is that, yes, okay, Israel won a war against Egypt and Jordan in 1967, and they've dominated these areas ever since. What I really referred to as cartoonish was the idea that they gave Gaza autonomy. I mean, this is just like nobody, even all of the people on the pro-Israeli side would not make this argument. Israel has controlled the water supply, the food supply, everything that comes in, whether they're allowed to have an airport, a seaport, how far they're allowed to fish off of their own coast. I mean, the idea that what people say is that they ended the occupation, that is disputed by human rights organizations, but nobody says that they granted them autonomy. Everybody knows that Netanyahu was working against the creation of a Palestinian state through his entire reign. So if we're just being honest about this and at least presenting that no, there is a complex and difficult history here with lots of atrocities committed from the Israeli side as well, that in order to work out a peaceful solution, all people ought to be granted their natural rights. And that does not happen under Israeli military occupation or the siege on Gaza.
You act as if the Israelis controlling the seas comes in a vacuum. You act as if...
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. You act as if it's a type of horror show, a type of oppression. You act as if their control of the electrical grid and water supply is somehow in a vacuum. But it's not in a vacuum. It takes place in the context of a terroristic state and society, a society that has adopted the charters of Hamas, which do not just extend to Israel. I mean, Israel hatred is one of them, and the elimination of the Jewish state is just one of their goals. They would certainly like to establish the Muslim Brotherhood caliphate over the rest of the world. Certainly grandiose and not really a rational goal, but it is their goal. So these restrictions that you're talking about are restrictions that are necessary for the security of the Israeli state to exist.
Well,
if they stop doing that, as we've seen, arms get through, munitions get through, rockets get fired, assaults get made, and there can't be a ceasefire when Hamas is still in power, when the ideology that's so toxic still saturates that country, and when they still hold the ideal that Israel should not be a state, which seems to be their ideal. They could have had a state multiple times. They could have been free a long, long time ago. They chose not to.
Okay, well, okay, so just notice kind of like the goalpost shift here, where now the domination of Israel, the control of all of Gaza, well, you see, Dave, that's in a context, and you're pretending like that's not in a context. A second ago, they had autonomy, and I was criticizing that, pointing out actually all of the Israeli controls, and then the goalpost moves to, oh, yes, but they have to. Okay, the problem with this, again, is that one of the tremendous asymmetries here is that I am not just taking Hamas's line and saying, yes, they're correct. I'm not just taking like an Arabic terrorist group or something like that and saying what they say is correct. But when you repeat back that the reason Israel does this is because they have to. I mean, they really wish they didn't have to for security reasons, but they have to control all of these supplies going into Gaza. The problem with that is that it is totally not true. If Netanyahu was overseeing cash payments in briefcases to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars directly to Hamas. And he was doing this for his own strategic reasons. But give me a break about how they just can't let anything in because it could be dangerous. You know, they can't see, David, if you understand, I know you're in the middle here on this situation. See, you can't let sugar or potatoes in because they have dual use. There's a dual use there. They could be used to make rockets and fire them on Israel. However, cash directly to Hamas, no dual use issues there. That couldn't be used for bad things against Israel. I know what you're telling me is what the official government line is. Yes, I'm familiar with that. What I'm telling you is that none of this it's not true, and it doesn't justify their treatment of the Palestinians. And you can sit here and talk all day long about the terrible, like, toxic ideology that has to be beaten out of the Palestinians. I don't know, man. If you put any group of human beings in the situation that they've been in all of these years, you're going to develop a lot of these problems. If anyone tried to come do that to the United States of America, you would have crazy armed militias rising up and doing all types of horrible things. And I'm not justifying any of that. I'm a libertarian. My principle is you can't kill innocent people unless it's a situation like as I described before, be in direct self-defense, real self-defense. But regardless of any of that, there is clearly there's clearly two sides to this story at the very least. And what an objectivist should certainly agree with is that, as I said at the beginning, it's never been responded to, but this involuntary taxation where America is forced to put a foreign country on welfare. I mean, you guys would be against any American citizen getting welfare. At the very least, you should not support America propping up Israel.
Okay, once again, you said a billion things that are difficult to address because you say a billion things. I did not move the goalpost. I said autonomy, and I meant political autonomy. And what did they do? They elected Hamas by a plurality and now support Hamas more than ever after the disaster that they've brought onto their people. So they were given political autonomy. Now,
just to be clear, just to be clear, and I'll let you go there. But no, you didn't say political autonomy. You said autonomy. If you want to correct yourself and say what I meant was political autonomy, fine. But instead, you do it in this way where you go, I didn't say autonomy. I said political autonomy. What you said is they gave them autonomy.
They were still able to move in and out of Gaza. They were still able to work in Israel. They were still able to do things until they decided to bring on the Second Intifada, which was another citizen war against the innocent Israeli people, at which point, of course, Israel had to protect itself again. So Palestinians seem to be very adept at punching themselves in the face and seeking world sympathy for it, and everybody seeing the bloody nose and assuming that Israel is doing it. It must be Israel's fault. I think that's a damn shame that happens, because they are doing it to themselves. But
again, this is the problem with this collectivist mindset. They're not doing it to themselves.
Hold on, Dave.
Okay.
Let's let him finish.
Yes, they in fact are. And all you have to do is watch any man in the street interview. It's dozens of hundreds of thousands of individuals who believe the same toxic ideology. That amounts to a collective of people doing what they're doing.
So and you're a collectivist.
Quote is a very popular historian, but he also flirted with the new historians who, in my opinion, have been refuted multiple times. I don't know that you've read any people who have refuted the new historians, but you should. And there was something else that you said that gets lost now in the rest. Oh, but I want to ask you, what moral standard do you judge this entire situation by? What is your moral standard? See, mine is rational self-interest, and I don't think Israel is completely acting in its own moral self-interest. I think in many ways they're divorcing themselves from their rational self-interest and doing things for the benefit of the world community, to be seen as more civil than the war should make them. I think that by my standard, they're doing less of what they should do. What's your standard?
Well, hold on, because you said quite a few things there, and I mean, look, again. What I was trying to interject with before is that, again, and I think you see this where you go, there's this analogy that I accept from all the other statists out there in the world, but where it's like, oh, the guy who started a fight and then got punched in the nose. And then everyone just sees the guy punched in the nose. When the reality is there's a guy who started the fight and then a 3-year-old girl gets stomped in the face. And everyone sees that 3-year-old girl, and that's why they're feeling like this moral horror about it. And for you to, it's just so crazy to me for an objectivist to sit here and act like the scenarios that we can make all of these people into one collective now. They started it. That group started it. What about, even if you said you saw, fine, let's say it's hundreds of thousands of people, that still leaves hundreds of thousands of people who aren't that person. And now they are just, not only is it that you say you have the right to do whatever you want to these people, but that you don't understand why people have sympathy about that. You don't understand why you see babies dying, and that as if what happened is, well, it's not that you said that exactly, but your scenario is that this guy starts a fight, then gets hit and has a bloody nose, and all everyone sees is the bloody nose, meaning that it was actually like a perpetrator. But that's not the case. And objectivists and libertarians alike, we should all see this like, no, there's separate individuals. And even if you claim that there's like a toxic ideology that swept this region, toxic ideologies sweep lots of areas, including lots of areas in the United States of America. That doesn't mean all of the people in those areas lose their natural rights.
Oh, you can
All
have
of
great.
Kentucky just gone.
You could have great sympathy for the innocent children who are being killed in this war and still understand where the moral responsibility for their death lies. And you could still understand that Israel does not have the responsibility to take care of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people do. And so long as they are willing to bear the cost of their children dying, which is evidenced by their lack of surrender, which is evidenced by their lack of rebellion, which is evidenced by their not returning the hostages, which is evidenced by their not returning to civilized world, which I don't think they embraced to begin with, then your only responsibility as a rationally self-interested being and as a rationally self-interested state is to stop the threat, which uses children and its population, its civilian population, as a tactic of war, probably for the first time in history. It's despicable, it's disgusting, it puts moral, decent people in a terrible moral dilemma, but they're forcing them to do terrible things to defend their own lives, and those men and women who are doing those things are going to be left with PTSD, while the Palestinian who believes martyrdom is an ethic, a virtue to follow, will call his parents and brag about how he murdered 10 people.
Yeah, there's no PTSD on the Palestinian side. I mean, do you see? This is why I call it cartoonish, because you ascribe humanity to one group and nothing but evil to another group, and you're like, oh yeah, that's it. The guy who had to murder those babies, he's gonna have PTSD. You know what? He probably will, Mark. But forgive me if my first impulse isn't to worry about the guy murdering babies having PTSD, and maybe my first impulse is to think about the baby who just got murdered and their family and what they're going through. And I'm sorry, but this is just like this kind of collective, like where you just assign one group as morally virtuous and the other group essentially has no rights. And to say that it is not, like, as if the people dropping the bombs bear no responsibility on the innocent life being lost. Of course, you straw man as saying Israel doesn't have to take care of the Palestinians. No one's suggesting that. But what we're suggesting is that they don't have a right to violate the rights of the Palestinians. And as far as the idea that there's like there's this existential threat and that almost like Israel has to do this, or we know that, you know, there'll be the next terrorist attack or whatever. Again, this is why I was talking about how you contradict objectivism. It's like prosecuting future crimes. First of all, you don't know what people are going to do in the future. And second of all, you know, obviously it's completely incompatible with libertarianism to prosecute people for what they might do in the future. But also, Israel had a massive security failure at best with October 7th. The idea that another attack is guaranteed, they can put all of their forces on that border and they can guarantee that Hamas isn't going to come in and pull anything like October 7th off again. The reality is Israel just doesn't have to do this. They're choosing to.
So they're not murdering babies, Dave. Hamas is placing babies in front of them and placing civilians in front of them. They leave rocket launchers in cribs. They put them in hospitals. This isn't a cliche or clownish or government-sponsored history. This is the fact. This is the fact of the matter. They built 300 miles of tunnel underneath Gaza. Now, they could have been building infrastructure and starting a legitimate state. Instead, they started a terror state that is underneath the civilian population. I might add, the most densely populated civilian population in the world, with 15,000 people per square mile. It is impossible not to hurt a civilian under those circumstances. Hamas knows it and uses it as a weapon. And that's the difference between Israel and Hamas, and the Palestinian people who continue to allow Hamas to do this horror, is that the Israeli people are attempting to avoid civilian casualties, in my view, to their detriment and risking Israeli lives as a result and dying as a result of them attempting to fulfill this altruist ethic, which still brings me back to this concept of what your moral standard is. Because my moral standard is rational self-interest. I think Israel has a claim to that. I also want to know what you think rights are. You seem to think people carry around rights like a suitcase or like an appendage, but that's not what rights are to me. And I'd like to know what your answers to both of those questions are. First, tell me, what's your moral standard?
Well, okay, sure. Sure. I'll go into that. I mean, for this situation, as in all political matters, I would say self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle.
Okay.
Simple.
That's it.
Well, yeah, you said rational self-interest. I'd say that.
Okay, rational self-interest. I don't think that means self-ownership. I don't think people own.
No,
themselves.
I didn't say that means self-ownership. I said, yeah, that was what you said. Your principles are these are mine. And in terms
applying them to Israel, why are you saying that? Why are you saying the Palestinians have those rights as well, even though they deny them?
I'm sorry. Why do I say the Palestinians have those rights as well?
Have these rights, though they deny them. They deny them in their political charters, and they deny them by not surrendering.
Again, that's okay.
This doesn't mean not innocent Palestinians. It means that as a whole, they are denying rights by not surrendering, because surrendering would be an embrace of rights, of a natural rights principle.
Okay. So I think that I apply these rights to all humans because, like Ayn Rand, I would say that they come from our humanity. So, and Ayn Rand has explicitly said that rights apply to all people. But in terms of why I apply them to the Palestinians, because they're also human beings, I would apply the same rights to the Israelis. I'm sorry. Could you maybe phrase the question a different way? I'm not quite getting it.
Well, because I don't think rights are natural in the sense that you're claiming they are. They're an artifice. Just like your clothes are an artifice, just like your house is an artifice. They're adjustments to natural facts, but they don't exist just there. And the Palestinians have not recognized the facts that rights are something that must be recognized in a human existence.
But this is a standard that you would never apply to us in Western countries. I mean, yeah, like our government also doesn't exactly recognize rights. I mean, it's this gigantic, it's not, you wouldn't call it a criminal organization, but you sure would call it a criminal organization if I started it and was running it. So like, yeah, I mean,
you keep going back to that, but that sort of evades the point here. We're talking, I asked you about what rights were. You say they're things that are applied to all people. I agree with you, except in cases where people do not reciprocate or where they do not.
It's hard to
themselves.
Mark, I just hope you know it's really hard to pin you down in this debate, because at one point earlier I said you're acting as if their rights don't exist, and you corrected me and said you weren't saying that. But now you're going back to saying that because Hamas because they won an election and they haven't overthrown them yet, and you've seen too many man on the street interviews that you didn't like, that therefore you suspend the natural rights of an entire group of people.
I said that the rights of the Israeli people, I said they don't have rights that they don't recognize. That's true.
Right.
They do recognize them. So they don't have them.
So what if somebody in Palestine does recognize them?
Hold on.
What type of logic?
I wanna hop in here. I want to hop in here real quickly.
I'll just very quickly say, I guess we could just like murder anybody who's not like a libertarian or an objectivist. If you don't believe in natural rights, then you don't have them.
No, if you don't recognize rights in others, you are likely a criminal. Sure.
No, that's not true.
I mean,
a socialist.
I have to kind of agree with that.
Well, no, I mean, there's lots of socialists. There's lots of people who vote for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. They don't recognize rights in other people. They're voting for people who are going to take them away.
That you spent the last 20 minutes criticizing. That you spent the last 20 minutes criticizing the United States of America as being a criminal organization, and now you're going back on it. But yes,
if you think I'm going back on it, you are completely missing my point. The point I was making is that people who support those guys don't respect the rights of other people. There's lots of people who don't respect the rights of other people. But again, Dave, when you're saying they're a criminal, the standard there is that they've initiated force against anyone, not just that they're like caught up in the wrong culture or something like that. And by the way, again, just think about the logical conclusion of this. Like, if you're really going to say that people in those countries don't have natural rights, then what you would be saying is that we could go to any third world primitive country and just carte blanche, morally speaking, do whatever we want to any of those people, and there's no moral issue with that.
said they don't recognize rights, and so
therefore they don't have them.
And are not entitled to them. Correct. And
exactly. So what I just said.
He does not recognize rights. They are often committing crimes against other people because that one does. It's not just an abstraction. It's actually actualized in physicality.
So let me ask you this. Let's drill down on this here. Since you finally, I pinned you down here. You're saying if you don't recognize your own rights, you don't have any rights. And then you get to somehow say that because in comparison to Gaza, Israel and the United States are rights recognizing, even though we all admit that they deny rights, but you're saying not quite as much as these other guys do. So where exactly is the line of when you are not a rights denying country and therefore none of the people in your entire society have any rights and you can do whatever you want to them? You can kill them.
The founding principles in Gaza have in them the destruction, the genocidal destruction of other humans.
I heard you make that point before, but answer my question. Where's the line?
Those are the founding principles. The founding principles in the Israeli Declaration of Independence are equality, a pluralistic society, equality for all. And the founding principles of the United States are likewise to be found in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. That is what I use as my North Star and is something that all of us should aspire to, always aspire to. However imperfectly. Unfortunately, we have to deal with people who imperfectly aspire to those goals because of contradictions in their thinking.
Well, I just think there's so many contradictions in your thinking here, and I think you're the person who's advocating that more people get killed. I mean, look, your standard, when I asked you the very specific question of when are entire groups of people's rights canceled out, is that we have some old documents that say nice things on them. I mean, like, this is such a wild standard for that's why we get to violate all these people's rights. This is like incoherent.
My standard is that Hamas must end. My standard is that Hezbollah must end. My standard is that Islamic Jihad must end.
But you're just repeating talking points. I'm asking you, what is the standard? When do you get to decide that they must end?
If we were in World War II, my standard would be that Nazis must go.
I'm sure you're against Nazis.
But of course. And what we're seeing now is a modern day version of Nazism, except except it's called religious jihad, and they are murdering people by the droves. And some of the biggest number of victims are in the Islamic community. So yes, I think the war should be pursued until Hamas is done.
Okay.
Entity, but done.
I get it. You're kind of just repeating yourself here, whereas I asked you a very specific question and you don't seem to have any type of answer for it. When is it? How do we get to determine that there are these countries that have all huge swaths of people's natural rights are canceled out? What exactly is the objective criteria for that? And it can't just be Hamas is bad and the Nazis were bad and Hezbollah is bad. I mean, okay, but what's the standard?
But Dave, you're the one who's now moving the goalpost to every country on the planet. I'm still talking about Gaza. I'm still talking.
I mentioned the ones that you brought up. I just mentioned the ones that you just brought up.
I'm still talking about Gaza. And when I talked about Germany, I was talking about them when they were in the throes of Nazism.
Yes, I know.
Right. And so their violence is what predicates our need to retaliate against them. And our retaliation has to continue until they are done.
That's an assertion, but you're not answering my question. Why is it that you get to determine that there's entire nations of people who none of their people have any rights? And by the way, so there's two questions very specifically that I want to know here.
Everybody answer these questions for themselves. Dave, you're answering questions all over the place. You're making yourself the god of who lives and dies in your own moral universe. We all do. We all do.
Okay, I'm going to ask you these two questions.
I'd say I definitely am not.
Okay,
that's my stance.
Let me see if I can get an answer out of these. But once again, what exactly is the criteria for when an entire nation's people lose their rights? And number two, what isn't the logical conclusion of that once you're over that line, I assume I could make a strong argument that pretty much every third world country is. So is there then no moral issue since they don't have rights? Why can't you, let's say just for fun, go kill a whole bunch of people there?
Well, you shouldn't do it for fun because that's not right to do it for fun. But you would have the moral right to do. You would have the moral right to take over the country.
You have the moral right to just go kill innocent people in any third world country?
You said a country that does not. Why do you call people innocent who do not recognize rights?
I mean, a baby doesn't recognize rights. It's still
No,
innocent. What type of question is that?
Let's presuppose we're talking about adults, which is what we are. Because
but I mean, I can use
rights is a complex moral phenomenon.
Okay, sure, but the reason
Even know anything about rights, and their rights are conditional anyway.
Yes, their rights are conditional, but the point that I'm obviously making by going to the example of a baby is that clearly it being immoral to kill someone, them having a right to not be killed, is not predicated on their understanding of the rights.
You think that child would grow up in a healthy environment that does not recognize rights?
It'd be better if it grew up in an environment that recognized rights, but that's completely beside the point. No, listen, there's a very tight question that I'm asking you here, and there's a very tight response I just gave to you. You're running away from it. Obviously, but listen, obviously children do not have full control of their rights the way parents do. They're kind of in escrow when they're little kids, but a baby does have the right to not be murdered. A baby does have the right to not be murdered and clearly cannot understand anything about that. So rights are not predicated on some understanding of your rights.
Which is not what we're talking about. You keep saying that children are being murdered. They are unfortunately dying in a war because Hamas and the Palestinian people are placing their children in harm's way to use them as a PR machine to get what they can't get by force. They're trying to demoralize Israel, demoralize the international community to get what they can't get by violence.
Okay, so essentially the point I was making at the very beginning of this, and this is why I say babies are being murdered, is that I think when we're talking, if we're having a philosophical conversation about morality, I think that you can't have such thing as macro and micro. That morality, since we're all just people, and no matter how big a group we get into, or whether we call ourselves government or we call ourselves a private company or whatever, morality essentially can't change. Practicalities can change, okay? So there are practical things that on different scales maybe you can't do. But the point I was making is that I don't hold a different standard for individuals than I do for governments. That's essentially the core of Rothbardian thinking, is essentially that idea, that there's not a difference. You may disagree with it, but this is the point I'm making. If as an individual, if someone came over to my house and even killed some members of my family and then ran back to their house, and I knew that their wife and children were there, and so I had a drone bomb and I blew up their entire house, I would go to jail for murder in the first degree because I knew that there were other innocent people there, and I don't have the right to just kill other innocent people because I want to enact revenge against someone who killed some of my people. Now, the point is that on an individual, on a micro level, we would call it murder, and I'm arguing that on a macro level, it's also called murder. I don't understand where Randian morality, deduced from first principles, can change when you get into the macro.
I never did change the principles you keep claiming I did. I said that the state should act in the same way that the individual was, from the same moral premises that the individual was. You keep changing it, and
maybe I'm misunderstanding you then. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding you.
And placing the individual criminal in a civil society where the police are actually anointed with the capacity to take that individual and protect the society at large. So it would not be within the interest of society to blow up an entire house because the criminal went inside. In fact, it would be the opposite. But that's
who knows? That's Randians like to make these claims for certain. I don't know. Maybe there is a really bad person that it would be better for society if 3 innocent people died and that person was killed with them. We don't really actually know that for sure, but that can't really be the standard. The reason you can run away from this, but no, if I did what I said, what the scenario I just mentioned, someone comes, kills my people, I go kill their whole family, knowing their family's inside there, you would not think I had acted morally and that I shouldn't be charged for that. Yet when governments do that, you're okay with that. You can find this thing that this ill-defined idea that at a certain point, entire groups of people lose their natural rights. I would just say to everybody watching at this point, because I don't think I'm going to get anything more than you out of this, that if that's going to be your argument, number one, the onus is on you to clearly demonstrate exactly how those people have lost their rights. You should clearly have to articulate what your standard is for when a nation's people lose their complete rights. And the other thing I would say is that you're just not an advocate of liberty at that point. If you're arguing that there are entire groups of people who just don't have rights and that you could go over and just kill people if they're in one of those societies, I mean, there's several names I could think of for that, but it's not anything liberty related.
You're putting words in my mouth and you're twisting my argument. And
I don't think I am.
I know you don't, and that's troubling. First of all, you're hammering me with hypotheticals. You know, if a person goes into a house, I've already told you that the context makes truth, and a police action within a civil society is a very different thing from a war. And I've already told you that.
But you have to say why. You can't just assert it.
You're telling me you tell me to be quiet. I listen to you.
Okay, sorry. My apologies.
You go on for 15 minutes and you go on, and then you never let me respond. And by that time, about 100,000 things that need to be responded to and can't be responded to. Look, the Palestinian people have made it very clear in the charter of Hamas, the people they elected by a plurality, and now is presently supported by 70% of the Palestinian people, if we include the West Bank, that their charter, their animus, their governing ideal is murder. It's genocidal murder. And it's not just an ideal, it's an ideal they act upon. And so, yes, they have lost their right. They have forfeited their rights to life. And the only gesture they can make, to me, that is a step in the proper direction to embrace rights again, is to renounce violence forever and to let Hamas go. They have to go. Those men have to be either killed or put on trial and die through due process or in prison. They do not deserve to be governing human beings anymore. And Palestinians should not be listening to what they listen to. They shouldn't be in the throes of their ideology because it makes them vulnerable to what is happening now. So that's when you lose your right.
Yeah, again, I just think that that was incredibly ill-defined. It was just like they have this awful founding charter and this spirit animates them and they've done these things. The problem is that if you wanted to say give like let's say like something tangible, like if you were to say when you start killing innocent people or when you commit acts of terrorism or when you do this, then you would have to also say, okay, well, where can we apply those standards to other governments? What have all of these other governments done as well? And the truth is that Israel has, since the creation of the state, also done some pretty horrible things to the Palestinians. And the truth is that if you like, this logic is almost like the same logic that a group like Hamas uses. It's kind of the same logic. They're like, we are defending ourselves. We have a right to be here and not be totally dominated. And so we're going to go over there. They've lost their rights now. All of those people are fair game. We can kill as much of them as we want to. I think this mentality is sickening on both sides. And I think that a more civilized mentality is needed.
What's sickening is that you think that there's no moral difference between the initiator of force and the defender. And you think the defender should pull back the force even before the initiator is completely done.
No, see, that's the thing, is that I'm not...
Promised and has promised that they're going to murder in the future. You're willing to commit a ceasefire, which has been done dozens of times, and has resulted in the same thing: violence against Jews, period. The only way you can deal with a group of people who do not recognize rights is deal with them by violence, because that is the way they are dealing with you. That's the way they're certainly dealing with the Israelis. That's the way they wish to deal with anybody who crosses them.
To be very clear, because this is a blatant straw man of what my position is, I'm not saying that the aggressors ought to be coddled or that the people acting in self-defense ought to slow down. If on October 7th, anyone from the IDF killed the men who had broken into Israel and were committing horrific acts of violence, I would not be sitting in here and saying, slow down, don't kill that person, don't defend those guys. The point I'm making is that Israel has been, in many instances, the aggressor and certainly has become the aggressor in this wars. Look, justice is an individual thing. It's not a collective thing. And somebody who, if you go and kill a whole bunch of innocent people who were not the aggressors, you have aggressed against them. That's the point I'm making. I'm against the aggression on all sides, which I think is a fairly reasonable and the only position consistent with objectivism or libertarianism.
I agree with you that the defenders have a moral obligation to end the threat forever. That's what they have to do.
It's now, circular logic to call them the defenders as a response to that.
Hamas surrendered?
Has Hamas surrendered? No.
Has the Palestinian people surrendered?
I mean, is this a trap you're leading me into? We all know the answers to this question. So what? No, neither have the Israelis.
So then the war isn't done. The Israelis shouldn't surrender. They're fighting for their
Again,
lives.
these are just assertions. I made an argument for why they're not the defenders, and then your response is they're the defenders.
Well, just because you say it so doesn't make it so, Dave.
Well, I made an argument. I made an argument for why.
All right. Let's. I'm gonna hop in here now because it's funny. I stressed out so much today finishing writing questions for this, and I have asked zero. This is still the opening statements and the responses, but I have a couple of kind of clarifying questions for each of you that might help us get kind of off of the circle that we've been doing, and maybe attack the issue from a perspective that hasn't been brought up in some of these debates. So first of all, I'm going to ask you, Dave, do you think that there is a possibility that your opinion on this topic is clouded by confirmation bias based on your hatred for the U.S., the military industrial complex, and kind of our role in it, that because we're on one side, the other side is more likely to be right?
I mean, look, like with a question like that, I think, and I think this is true for all of us who are in this space. And when I say in this space, I just mean in talking about these ideas and caring about philosophy and politics and foreign policy and all of this. That's constantly something we all have to fight against. And, you know, like I was just literally on the phone with Scott Horton the other day, and we were talking about something, and he was like, we both agreed that the golden rule is always that if something like supports your narrative, be 10 times harder on that than you would be on something else, you know? So it's something I think everyone should always be fighting against. By the way, I'm also somewhat incentivized, personally speaking, to not have the politics I have on this issue. There's been a price to pay for my position on Israel, unlike just about any other position I've ever had. I try my best to listen to the best people who are making the arguments against it, and I'm just totally unpersuaded. And I guess that's what keeps bringing me back to being like, no, actually, I do think I have the right position here, is that whenever I listen to the arguments of people on the other side, I just think they're kind of incoherent and one-sided and just not dealing with the reality of the situation, which is, you know, kind of like I tend to believe, like, if you kept just about any group of people in the situation that the Palestinians are in, what's going on right now is a predictable outcome. And I think that, you know, having like read as much as I've read about blowback, and even to where the people at the highest levels of the American establishment, like you're talking CIAs and 4-star generals, all when they're talking about it with their people, know that that's what it is. Look, after 9/11, Colin Powell was the one who went to George W. Bush and goes, you got to do a 2-state solution now. You got to take the juice you have right now and do a 2-state solution, because he knew that this was the cause of so much of the reason why we're hated over there. And even the top Israeli leaders have said this over and over and over again. It was Barack, who said, the former prime minister, who said, if I was an Arab at the right age, I'd be a terrorist too. And they've at the highest levels of the Israeli government admitted for many decades that they know exactly why they're hated in this world, why they have to deal with this terrorism problem. And I just think that, like, it's a better world if they could get out of this game. Look, Egypt was the #1 enemy of Israel for the first 25 years or so. I think they went to war 4 times. And then they made a deal in the 70s, a land for peace, and it's stuck ever since. It's not perfect, but it's stuck. And I think that that's what needs to happen here, some type of land for peace deal. And the idea of saying, like, oh, well, I mean, all of this stuff about, you know, like, if I was questioning myself when someone says to me that all of these people lose their rights and it's okay to go, like, kill innocent people in these, no, I'm sorry. I'm not on that side.
First of all, I have to sort of answer that, because, you know, regardless of what Colin Powell said, the Palestinians don't want a 2-state solution. They've never been interested in a 2-state solution, irrespective of how they've pretended they don't. Every man on the street interview shows it. And the Palestinians themselves have turned down a 2-state solution several times. And I don't think the Israelis should be a neighbor to a state that wants it dead, that holds its eradication from the face of the earth as a primary value. That is just fundamentally wrong thinking. It's not, you're not even on the planet if you think that. And clearly Colin Powell was on acid when he said that.
I would love to see Colin Powell on acid. That's a great.
Colin Powell, let me tell you, there'd be some dark thoughts that start coming into that guy's head if he was on acid.
Sorry, had to lighten the mood a little bit. Keep going, Mike.
No, that's all I had to say, because there is no two-state solution so long as Palestinians will not compromise in any respect with respect to Israeli security.
Just again,
well, then
can I just very, very quickly respond to that? Just on a note of the history, I mean, maybe perhaps it's me. I did kind of think in this debate, it was kind of interesting to me because I haven't debated an objectivist on this point of view to get into some of the more philosophical stuff. But I've done a ton of these debates that's been more strictly on the history of it. And like, listen, I'll just say quickly, like, people can go listen to the secret recording of Netanyahu where he's bragging about all the poison pills that he snuck into the peace deal and how they were able to outsmart them. I highly recommend people read the book The Truth About Camp David by Clayton Swisher. It's this idea that it's the Israelis have just been trying to give them a state the whole time, and these people just don't want their independence. I think is historically inaccurate.
It's not that they don't want their independence. Their independence, they believe, comes at the expense of the existence of the Jewish state. And I don't care what Netanyahu says to whatever company of people that he's trying to appeal to at the moment. He's a pragmatist politician. I don't care what he says to me. I could pick out a billion different quotes from him that will lead me down a billion different paths. You've chosen those to define the entire Israeli position by. It's a fact that the Palestinians have refused to negotiate with Israel because it requires that they recognize Israel as a state, which they will not do.
It's kind of like I like when a lot of the defenders of Israel will give me this pushback. It's kind of like if I pointed to a murderer confessing to a crime and you're like, oh, you chose to pick that line instead of picking all these other things. He says, yeah, it does seem like a pretty damn admission. And listen, to say the Palestinians have always refused to negotiate that's just factually inaccurate. There were many different sit-down meetings. There was many negotiations. And in fact, even after Camp David in 2000, it was Arafat who wanted to continue the negotiations, and it was the Americans and the Israelis who refused to continue. So it's not true.
It was Arafat who said different things in Arabic, and it was Arafat who started the Intifada, regardless of that. And yes, what you do is cherry pick certain lines out of, say, 2,000 pages of text, or you cherry pick certain thoughts out of hundreds and hundreds of diary entries, all to prove your particular point. And I could do that with almost any statesman, and I could do it with you. I could do it to probably prove that you're a Nazi. I could probably find
plenty of people have tried. So many people have tried.
I dare you to go down that path, sir. It's never worked out well for those people.
I almost made the joke earlier that when Mark was talking about like being against Nazis, I was like, damn, Dave, this is the closest you've gotten to someone actually renouncing Nazism on a show.
Well, there you go.
Long time.
Listen, I mean, of course it is true to some degree that whenever any of us are talking about history, we're cherry picking. You try your best to say the things that you think are important and relevant. I would just say that as you rattled off your interpretation of the history of Israel-Palestine, there was certainly a lot of cherry picking there as well. You weren't like telling the story of Israel and saying like, let's start with Dair Yassin and the Zionists going in and slaughtering people and kicking them out. Okay.
You always bring up the same things that are, in fact, more complicated than you make them seem. And there's only one reason.
Well, I was just making a point. I was just making the point that you're cherry picking too.
The point you're trying to make is to smear a more virtuous state and raise up a less virtuous one.
No, not really at all. And in fact, it's not what I'm trying to do at all. I was merely, you're not responding to the actual point I was making, which is that we all cherry pick in these situations. So that was the point. I'm not trying to smear a more virtuous state. I actually think that, as I've said in almost all of these debates, I think Israel's a cool country. And I think it's kind of amazing. It's an amazing story that you couldn't believe if you were to write it down, that there were this group of Eastern Europeans, by the way, of my people, like I'm Jewish, you know, who were living through these pogroms and this horrible oppression, and they kind of dreamed up this scheme that they were going to start their own country. They got the international financing, they put it together. These were people who had never been there, didn't speak Hebrew. It's really an amazing accomplishment, and I think Israel's a really good place to live for most of its citizens. I just think their treatment of the Palestinians has been wrong, and it's inexcusable. So no, I'm not just trying to cherry pick to put down Israel and pick up Hamas or something like that. That's not what I'm doing. It's not what I ever do.
And yet their treatment of Arab Israelis is not. And I think there's a reason for that. The Palestinian identity itself means something that you can't divorce yourself from. It actually means something. And it's all tied into not recognizing Israel's status as a state and attempting to destroy it.
Of course. I mean, there's truth to that. There is a lot of truth to that there is a lot of feeling like that in the amongst Palestinians. It's not all of them, but it certainly is a good portion. But also it's like, yeah, might that have something to do that the creation of Israel involved something like 700,000 to 800,000 of them being kicked out of their homes and not allowed back in? And might that have something to do with the fact that they've been totally occupied and dominated by the Israelis since 1967? It's like, yeah, look, dude, there was never almost an opportunity. Anybody coming up in that would hate their oppressors. And that's why Hamas gains popularity. When the peace negotiations were on, the support for Hamas was much less. And then when they fell apart, the support for Hamas went way up. It's kind of similar to in America, where after 9/11, you have this rally around the flag effect. And people are like, yeah, let's go blow something up, man. Someone's got to pay for this. It's not that there's nothing to your point. It's just that it's much more complicated than that.
Dave, 700,000 people moved out of their homes during the war in 48. Most of them left of their own accord. Some were kicked out by the IDF for being in a war corridor. They were not allowed in. Okay,
none of them were allowed back. Yeah,
none of them were allowed back for what I think are obvious reasons. But wasn't there another refugee crisis that happened? What do you think of that?
Of the Jews being kicked out of the Arab states?
They were ethnically cleansed from Arab states.
Yeah, no, it's horrible.
8,000 of them. What happened to them?
That went to Israel.
They went
mostly,
to Israel.
for the most part.
Yeah, and they were interned in camps for a while until Israel could find, the resources to house them. But the same thing should have happened with respect to Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon with the Palestinian refugees, and they refused for a reason. This is an Arab-caused problem. It's an Arab-caused
because it's the Palestinians' fault that they were refused to be allowed that?
Not in that respect. It is not. It is not. Right.
But you said they refused for a reason. So what was the implication?
Let him finish. Yeah, because I think he was going to answer the question.
Sure.
What was what?
No, I said you said they were refused for a reason. So I was just like, what was the implication of that?
To me, the Arab states wanted to keep them as a tool of leverage because they wanted a Arab federation. They were pan-Arabist nationalists, and the Palestinians were nothing to them. They were nothing in the early negotiations to them. They were something to the Israelis, who were actually trying to negotiate on behalf of two states. In fact, when the Peel Commission decided to divide up the Palestinian area, the Palestinians would have gotten 80% of it, and the Jews only 20%, which they were perfectly happy with. The Palestinians rejected it. They rejected the two-state partition on the part of the UN, and they have rejected every state offer since then. Now, granted, it comes with conditions now. The conditions are predicated upon, one, recognizing that Israel exists as a state and it's just a fact that they have to deal with, and two is on the condition that they have their safety to look out for and will. There's nothing irrational about that. That is the one there are two rationally self-interested ideas that are being put forth in the peace process that are not being acknowledged by the Arabs.
Well,
but I don't hold Palestinians.
Again, there's some of that I agree with. I think there's a lot that's missing to that too. Look, it's true that other Arab countries did not take in the Palestinians the way that the Israelis took in the Jews who had been kicked out of the respective Arab countries that they got kicked out of. Okay, that's true. And part of that might be for the reasons you said. In fact, I think part of it is for the reasons you said, to kind of use them as a weapon against the Israelis. And certainly there was a lot of interest at that time in Arab independence. kind of understandably. By the way, when you went back, you were talking about the Balfour Declaration at the beginning. At the same time that the British were signing the Balfour Declaration, they were also telling the Syrians that if you rise up against the Ottomans, we're going to give you independence. And so they were toying around with this kind of like, they knew there was desire for Arab independence there. Another part of the reason is that there was a lot of hope amongst Arabs that they were going to retain some of this land, which has a lot of their holy sites on it, and they didn't feel like just abandoning that. That's still a big part of this issue today. But the reality is that either way, even if you're completely right about that, it's still not the poor Palestinians' fault that these other Arab states were using them as tools against the Israelis. And so again, it's just like, so what? We just come back to the place that they get subjugated forever, for longer than the communists occupied Eastern Europe. Israel just has a right to occupy Palestine. I mean, this is like, this is a completely unreasonable, unsustainable situation. And there's a lot more to it. Again, the Arab states kicking out Jews doesn't make it right that the Jews kicked out the Arabs. You could just say all of that was not right.
No, I can also say that during war, it was proper for them to move out of the war zone. You probably might have just as easily said they were committing genocide had they let them stay there. They, in fact, oftentimes the Jews begged them to stay, and many did, and those people became citizens of the Israeli state. The others did not want to become citizens of the Israeli state. But let me ask you something. During the Jordanian occupation of the West Bank, were Jews allowed there?
I'd imagine no.
Correct. They were not allowed there. Do they have a holy site in the West Bank?
Yeah, several. That's why they want it. That's why they're still building settlements there to try to take it.
Yeah. What was it? What's their holiest site in all of Judaism? What's the holiest site?
I don't know. You tell me.
It's the Western Wall, and they were not allowed.
Right. Oh yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, I should have known that. Right. That wasn't part of Israel.
I was gonna say, how did the Jew not get that question?
I probably should have gotten that one.
Years.
Man, I'm gonna have some family members upset with me over that.
No Jew could go to their holiest site of all, and look, I think the Jews have managed holy sites in Israel far better than Islamic jihadists have. That's for sure.
Quite possibly.
What jihadists did to the Church of the Nativity wasn't exactly what I would call kind. They have no sense of responsibility to the sanctity of other religious monuments or sites, and there is a paranoia amongst the Palestinians and Arabs in general, which was fomented early on during the Mandate, that the Jews wanted to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome on the Rock, which has no basis in truth, but it fed a lot of hatred, and a lot of that hatred is just a conspiracy narrative, unfortunately, that even continues to this day. David, did you want to ask me a question? Because you asked Dave a question. Did you?
Yeah, I did actually. So do you think that there is any logical way to root out Hamas and Hezbollah without leveling entire city blocks? And what is your defense for them choosing the latter consistently?
Well, I don't know about Hezbollah. I don't know how Hezbollah has embedded its infrastructure in southern Lebanon, but we know that in Gaza there's more tunnel infrastructure than there is under the city of New York, and many of those tunnels that harbor intelligence communication hubs, that harbor weapons and murderers, jihadis, are under civilian areas, mosques, churches, hospitals, and many entrances to the tunnels come from underneath houses. And many of the citizens were participants in the attacks against Israel on October 7th, and even bartered away some of the hostages for social credit and for whatever other kind of currency they have over in Gaza. So it's literally a war tactic of Hamas to use their citizens as shields in an attempt to break down, morally incapacitate the Israelis by shaming them in the eyes of the world, because it's literally impossible not to have collateral damage. Whether the same thing exists in Lebanon is I can't say. Certainly they should go after Hezbollah rigorously, I don't know that they are embedded in the civilian population in the same way, nor do I think the Lebanese people are entirely on the page of Hamas. In fact, there's probably a great proportion of them that want Hamas gone because they've made southern Lebanon a hell to live in, and I'm sure that they might even join the Israelis in trying to defend themselves against Hezbollah. So two different tactics because of two different types of war because of two different tactics entirely.
If you think Israel's going to be greeted as liberators in Lebanon, I think they got another thing coming, and I think the Israelis know that. That's Hezbollah already kicked them out of there before, and they'll do it again.
Certainly being greeted by Iranians as such. And in Iran, I see a large liberal movement that I think that I have great hopes for overthrowing the mullahs if the United States could get behind them, which they never have. But maybe there's hope in Iran. And as Iran goes, maybe the rest of the Middle East will go, because they were certainly the inspiration for Islamic Jihad since '79.
Well, I know that those positive reverberations after we overthrow Saddam Hussein that Netanyahu promised us should be kicking in any day now. So I'm sure democracy is about to sweep that region, Mark.
That was the wrong war, and I don't think a single objectivist thought it was the right war.
There were definitely objectivists who supported the war in Iraq.
Nobody of consequence that I know.
Really? I thought objectivists were pretty split on that.
They might have said what I said, which is because a government or people don't recognize rights, we have the right to go in there. But should we? No. We could have had the right to go in and take out Saddam Hussein, but I don't think we should have.
Fair enough.
All right. So
Well,
I mean, I guess I would just, I guess I'm not going to get an answer to this, but just when you say, so we have the right, I mean, if their people don't have any rights, we have the right to do whatever we want to any of those people, right?
No, but you certainly have the right to go in there and institute some other form of government.
But if they don't have rights, why don't we have the right to do what we want?
Well, when we went into Japan after we won the war, did we do anything we wanted?
I'm not saying that that's a completely different empirical question. I'm asking you if what we have the right to do.
We didn't recognize rights either. So we occupied their country and forced constitutional norms down their throats, and they became a better country as a result. And I'm saying we have a right to do that with countries that don't recognize rights. Should we? Not necessarily. Probably not ever.
Yeah, but again, it's just kind of dodging my question. I'm saying, do we have the right to? I'm not asking should we. I'm saying we have the right to just go in there and kill women and babies.
I'm not saying, no, you keep changing the topic.
I'm not changing. I'm asking a question because it logically follows from you saying they don't have rights. This is so obvious.
We have the right to go in there and institute a constitutional rights respecting government. And if people fought us on that, we would have the right to take action against them, to kill them if they fought a rights respecting government. We have the right
it's incoherent.
necessarily, but that doesn't mean we should.
Yeah, I got that distinction. No one's arguing against that distinction. I'm just saying, like, if those women and children don't have a natural right to live, then it's not a rights violation to kill them, right? I mean, it's just the same statement stated differently. If they don't have rights, then if I went in there and just murdered all of them, I have not violated anyone's rights because they didn't have any rights.
You're wrong. You're oversimplifying this and reducing. It's sort of a strange kind of reductionism going on.
It's the same thing stated differently.
They don't have rights as recognized by their own government. They lack rights because their government doesn't recognize them.
So if they don't have rights, then killing them would not be a rights violation.
No, I'm saying that we have a right to go in there and institute a rights respecting.
I got that. You're saying that. That's not what I'm asking you. I get it. You say we have a rights to go in there to institute a rights respecting government, however we define that. But
yes, we had a right to do that in Iraq. Shouldn't have. We had
again, Mark, you're flooding the zone with the thing I already agreed on because you know you can't answer my really simple question. I'll ask it one more time and then I'll just give up on it. If the people there don't have rights, then it wouldn't be a rights violation for me to go murder women and children in one of these countries.
You are the one misrepresenting my concept, which is if a society based on its state, its government does not recognize rights, that state does not have the right to exist. We can change that state at any time we want. Anyone who fights...
That's not what you said before. That's not what I'm asking. What you said is that the people don't have rights.
Anyone who fights for the state that does not recognize rights can and should probably be killed in war.
You're totally backing off of the statement that you clearly made earlier in the debate, which was that the people themselves don't have rights.
I'm clarifying it and removing it from your sophistry. That's what I'm doing.
It's not sophistry, dude. It's just you moving the goalpost. Listen, we'll let the audience decide whether you're completely contradicting yourself or whether I'm invoking sophistry. But I guess I'm not going to get a better answer than that. So let the audience decide.
I'm gonna take back over here since
Sure.
we are starting to go a little bit over what I promised I'd hold you guys to. And I'm gonna do, before we do closing kind of arguments, I'm gonna do the super duper cliche debate moderator tactic. I'm gonna make both of you tell me something that you actually agree with the other person on that they said tonight, and I'll start with Mark.
Yeah, I agree that we should not be funding other countries. I agree that we should not be funding other people's militaries. I agree that we should not be sending welfare to other countries or even doing it in our own, for that matter. And I'm trying to think of any other areas of agreement. I also agree that we, even though we may have the right to enter certain states that don't respect the rights of their citizens, that doesn't mean that we should enter states that don't respect the rights of their citizens. We fight wars only when our interest in survival is at stake, and we fight in a retaliatory sense, and we fight vigorously until the threat is ended, which I think was done in World War II, and I think Israel is attempting to do in Hamas, but they're not really given the opportunity to.
All right, Dave.
Well, I really appreciate that, first of all, and that's especially I would think this would come up more because especially since the whole war is being funded and armed by the United States of America, that you're actually against that. So that's great. I would say, look, I mean, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I do think that there's really a point to be made for the fact that that Israel has created a society where in many respects there are rights for their citizens, and rights that the average person in a lot of these other Arab states do not enjoy under their own governments. And I do think that that really counts and is really important. I don't think it's particularly relevant to the conflict with the Palestinians, but I do think that it is something that is that everybody who believes in liberty should also take into the greater equation of how they feel about Israel, and not just their foreign policies. And as the example I like to use a lot is, I think the war in Iraq was totally immoral and horrible and inexcusable, but because I don't think we had the right to do that, is essentially my argument. But that doesn't mean that I would, like, if I was judging the United States of America versus Saddam Hussein's Iraq, I would say Saddam Hussein's Iraq is a superior society or something like that, you know? So I do think it's important. And sometimes people on more in my camp can kind of lose sight of that.
Fair enough. I definitely
Debate. That's not a bad debate to tactic. It's good. It's good to end on a positive note like that, where we are, whether we like it or not, are strange bedfellows in a liberty movement. We have some fundamental disagreements, moral disagreements, that are disagreements that need to be hashed out until we get it right. And I think I'm right. Dave thinks he's right. And we can keep having these arguments, especially in front of people, until we get it right. And I think that's the only way the liberty movement is going to advance any further against the duopoly that we have out there now.
Yeah, I would love to
agree
put
with
you
that.
two. I'd love to put you two against each other for kind of a round two of your spike debate of objectivism versus anarchy. That's always a fun time. Dave, give us kind of, buttoned up elevator pitch closing statement.
Okay, well, look, I think that, just being quite blatant, I don't mean this as an ad hominem. I genuinely don't mean this as an insult at all. I think there were just a lot of contradictions that were kind of demonstrated in Mark's worldview. I think that the idea that you're going to say an entire group of people lose their natural rights if their government or that even they themselves don't somehow express a desire or a want for it, that I mean, I just think that the implications of this worldview lead to such obvious horrors that it has to be rejected immediately. The sane objectivist or libertarian reading on this situation or take on this situation is that we believe that individuals have natural rights. And of course, if you are an aggressor, you forego those rights. But that does not apply to women and children and men who were not aggressors. And that just because they live under a government, even if they vote the wrong way, I mean, the implications for this obviously would be that even though it's convenient for this debate for Mark to frame our governments as rights protecting institutions, I think we all would acknowledge if we weren't talking about this as compared to Hamas or as compared to other Arab countries, any good objectivist would have to admit that our government is not a rights protecting organization. It is much more of a rights violating organization that occasionally protects a few rights, these days seeming more and more on accident than anything intentional. I think I was asking for the standard of when these groups of people lose their rights, and there was nothing very compelling there. It was kind of like, well, we have these old documents, which we all know we don't follow at all anymore, but they're there, and we could maybe one day live up to that spirit. I think that the bottom line is that I'm glad that we can all, I guess, kind of agree that America should stop funding this whole thing. If that were the case, Israel would be forced to negotiate with their neighbors. If you really care about Israel, what Israel's doing right now is embarking on a suicide mission. They have put themselves in more jeopardy than they've ever been in my lives. Global opinion has turned against them in a dramatic way, and this is for the obvious reason that people don't just see aggressors being punished. They see babies suffocating under rubble, and the overwhelming onus is for somebody, not to say that those people don't have rights, but to demonstrate that there is no other option. And the fact is that there are lots of other options. Israel just doesn't have to do this right now. We didn't really go back and forth on this a lot, but the idea that you're going to totally eradicate Hamas is both U.S. and Israeli intelligence have admitted that this isn't going to happen. If you read the New York Times and the Washington Post, even on their reporting every day, or even better yet, if you go over to antiwar.com and read Dave DeCamp and all those guys, that Hamas is popping back up in all of the areas that Israel's already leveled. You're never going to defeat Hamas this way. You're going to end up with more Hamas or a Hamas-like group, because the truth is that when you do this to people, when you occupy them forever, and when you treat them this way, there's a tendency for them to hate you. And this is just going to continue and spiral on more and more. In the meantime, for people in the United States of America who believe in liberty, what we should be advocating is first and foremost that our government has no part of it. But if our government has to have some part of it, it should be to try their best to negotiate not just a ceasefire, but a meaningful peace in the region. Obviously, there's a lot of obstacles to that, largely AIPAC, but also a lot of evangelicals in this country who believe that, like their God's not going to come back until the Jews control all of Israel. And of course, I would imagine, as an objectivist, the fact that so much of the pro-Israel side is relying on this 2,000-year-old religious claim to the land, and that so much of the support in America is based off this nonsense that these evangelical Christians believe. I would imagine you'd at least have to acknowledge that and reject all of that. I guess I'll end on that.
Right, Mr. Pellegrino.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say that with respect to not being able to end Hamas because all these defense intelligence agencies say that it can't happen because they're popping up all over the place, I will say that the CIA at first predicted that Israel would never be able to fight against all the Arab armies in the late 40s, early 50s, and they were wrong, as these intelligence agencies are wrong. What is keeping organizations like Hamas alive is this constant attempt at moral equivalency between people, and the moral equivalency robbing the defenders of the moral certitude they need to finish the fight. Now, Hamas knows this. Islamic jihadists know this. They know that we won't have the stomach to finish the fight, because once it gets ugly, we start to, cringe, as anybody would, because war is a horrible thing, and they've brought it upon themselves. As Sherman said, war is hell. But he understood also that the southern states would not relinquish slavery until until the war was brought to the doorsteps of the plantation. And I don't think the Palestinians or the Arabs who are jihadists or jihadist adjacent are going to understand that jihadism is an evil ideology until the war is brought to their doorstep. And if that means burning the plantation down in the south, it might be burning the house down until they understand that death and destruction is what jihadism means. And if they want to be a free people, they have to divorce themselves from the Palestinian identity, become Arabs, and take a state that respects the rights of the individual citizens within, which they have so far not done. I wanted to say Israel has been perpetually negotiating with the Arabs for decades upon decades upon decades to the same effect. They've negotiated ceasefires always to the same effect. What is that effect? A retrenchment of the jihadis, and more violence follows. So what I want is an end to war. What Dave proposes is perpetual warfare. Now, just us stopping funding is not going to stop the jihadis from trying to murder Israel. They hate the state of Israel. Israel has had to go on its own before, and it's not like they can't do it again. And it's not like they can't shock the world by victory again, provided they maintain the moral certitude that they are in the right by being rights respecting in their documents and rights aspiring in the type of society that they tried to create. And that's what I have to say.
All right. I appreciate both of you guys so much for doing this. I'll shout out our sponsors one more time real quick. Blood of Tyrants is up here on the screen. bloodoftyrants.wine. Go grab a bottle or 2 or 17 and then rewatch this. It'll probably be a little bit more fun if you're drunk. Dave, Mark, thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to give you both a couple seconds. Tell us, how to find you, what your guys are up to, any, show dates for both of you. Mark, go.
All right. Yeah, you can find me on Mark R. Pellegrino on Twitter, or if you want something friendly and just about dogs and cats and my animals or projects, go to my Instagram at Mark Ross Pelly. It's the checkmark guy. I just finished a TV series called The Motel, which hopefully will go since American Rust isn't going to be going any further. I'm about to probably launch into a movie in November pretty soon. And continue with my reality checks, hopefully. Hopefully we can continue to have discussions like this about a great many things, dive deeper into objectivist ethics, which I think was sort of glossed over and a little bit misunderstood. That's it. That's it. You can find me at John Jacques Machado's training every day as well.
Hell yeah.
I don't want any more people. Stay away from me. I guess. All right. ComicDaveSmith.com and partoftheproblem.com are my sites, and then I'm all over social media and stuff. But thank you, Mark. Thank you, David. I enjoyed the spirited debate, and I do very much agree with what Mark said about these debates being important and having them publicly and kind of having these ideas flushed out a bit. So I appreciate both you guys.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you, Civil, for hosting us and having this out here exclusively tonight. This will be up on the Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, and Odyssey tomorrow. Oh, and Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. Those will all be up tomorrow. Go make sure that you are subscribed to all the things. Go follow these two absolutely wonderful gentlemen. And until next time, keep up the fight.
This is FSM.